Book 1, Chapter 1. Mankind's Search for Truth. Shan, Mythical Mountain of Seeking and Finding. The Infantry Soldier, Overtone. In the book, A Guide to Awareness and Tranquility, I wrote briefly of my time in warfare and one of the grand lessons about judgmentalism it afforded me. Over the years, people have said how much that story meant to them, perhaps more than all the stories I've written. To the Western set of mind, there is a certain incongruity about an old soldier being one of whom a measure of light has been revealed. I can understand that. Many singular events that I have never written about occurred during those days. I was, after all, a captain of infantry in 2 long wars. I lived with Chinese infantry troops in the field for nearly 3 years, subsisting with them, nearly starving with them. The few American soldiers in China had very little support from the United States during World War II. We were at the end of the world's longest supply line, and anything that reached us from home had been flown over Japanese-occupied countries, over the great Himalayan mountains into Kunming, thence to be trucked and packed in by animals to us, wherever we might be. I didn't live very well during those years. My last year in China, as the Great War came to an end, I joined Chinese troops who were actively engaged against the Japanese and fought in the battles that recaptured Aishan, Luchao, and Guilin. In Korea, less than 10 years later, I commanded King Company 279th Infantry Regiment, 45th Division, during the final months of that awful war. I also commanded Heavy Mortar Company, 279th Infantry Regiment. Things were much harder for me in Korea's combat than in the long, strange war in China. Being older didn't help me in Korea, nor did I have wise old Mr. Shea at Korea's great sandbag castle or at Vulture's Roost on the 38th parallel. It is interesting that I've never written about those days, even though I've told of the learning events to seekers who have come to visit here in Alabama. I especially relished telling such tales to the metaphysical absolutist or to the young zealot idealist who arrived expecting only gentle words of peace from a godly teacher. Since stories of strife, warfare, and suffering are the last thing those people expect to hear from a metaphysician, that's often what they got. Show me a revelation, and I'll show you a traumatic event from which that light emerged. Show me a true vision of heaven, and I'll show you a descent into the anguish of hell wherein that vision was tried, tested, and found faithful. Prove me now herewith, said the Lord. Put all things to the test, Paul echoed. And now, having written nearly everything necessary for the final book, I sit me down on yet another Memorial Day to remember my soldiers who fought with me in many battles. Let me write a glimpse or two from those days. First, harking back to China, Mr. Shea and I, with 5 American teammates, were being pursued by a Japanese combat patrol. We were retrograding bringing up the rear of our little patrol, trying to get back to the safety of friendly lines. We were close to being captured. In those days, neither the Japanese nor Chinese gave quarter. That is, they took no prisoners. I knew that if I were taken by the pursuing Japanese, it meant certain death. On the other hand, Mr. Shea might successfully pass himself off as a Chinese peasant. Oh, I cannot write of this story. At this minute, it is enough to remember Mr. Shea seeing and pointing out the beauty of those purple blooms on the distant mountain we had yet to climb. I marveled at a man who could see beauty under such oppressive circumstances. I marvel more that he helped me learn to do it. During the Korean War, as artillery rounds burst among my men on the left flank, several bodies were hurled about, and I ran to see the extent of the damage and whether the platoon leader was still effective. Sick to my stomach at the sight, I sat down among 3 of the bodies sprawled along the slope. I became aware of a visual presence hovering beside them, a misty, blue-white light of sorts, a different kind of light, primal, persuasive, and powerful. I could not explain what I saw then, nor can I now, but with the sight, and because of the sight, I was absolutely certain within myself I was being shown evidence of the deathlessness of life, the survival of the child, the soul of men. I felt a marvelous sense of relief, almost gratitude, concerning those men and everything happening that day. Within a few minutes of that incident, my regiment, and my part of the line in particular, was hit by an enormous wave of shell fire and oncoming Chinese troops. Hell erupted in a manner that no one can sufficiently describe or picture for another. One simply must experience something like that to fully understand. But to the ongoing glimpse I'd like to write here if I can. In the early moments of that terrible onslaught wherein everything that moved was slaughtered 10 times over, advancing troops, men, women, children, dogs, and chickens, and every moving creature caught at that place at that time, I was suddenly unable to hear. My world went silent, and I was enveloped in an immeasurable calm. In the midst of that horrendous din of exploding bodies and shells, I could hear nothing but my own voice. In some marvelous way, I was caught up in a quiet, tranquil dimension, separate but attached to the carnage at hand. I had not been wounded. I felt as well as one could be expected to feel under such circumstances. I could hear my own voice and even my breathing quite clearly. I went from gun position to gun position and heard myself giving calm encouragement to my troops. I could see their mouths move in reply in gratitude and terror, but I couldn't hear them. I heard myself, but couldn't hear the shells bursting in my face. I was beset with a wonderful, enwrapping calm that let me move fearlessly to do whatever the moment asked me to do, as hideous as those moments were. Perhaps a man can so detest a situation that his body produces the chemicals which, in turn, erect a barricade between himself and the galling situation. But as this was happening for me on that long day in Korea, there was a clear perception that a superlative reality stood just behind the events, that there is another scene just above this one, surrounding it. That reality was bursting through that corridor of chaos into my own conscious recognition. I walked with a detached courage, as if the mortal body couldn't be and wouldn't be hurt. I ran from soldier to soldier, gun to gun. I was knocked down, spun around, and stung with rocks and earth, feeling nothing but a calm, clear sense of life's dominion over the sights and sounds of the world, as though, with the presence I had sensed and seen moments earlier among the first bodies felled, I was seeing and feeling life's eternal nature, even in the face of death. Perhaps this was the beneficent calm Mr. Shea had felt those years earlier when he saw the blossoms on the distant mountain. That particular hellfire and damnation in Korea lasted 4 nights and 3 days without sleep for my troops and me. I have never forgotten the different time frame and the enwrapping inner peace, nor how I was held and supported during that time, or non-time. More significant, that peace has not forsaken me since those days, at least not when I was mindful of it, nor when the chips were down and I called for it. How do I call for it? I bring forth the child of me. Why I write this now, after all these years, I really don't know. But on this Memorial Day, when I feel everything necessary for the book has been written, I sit me down and write something that might tell others, like Janice and Bill, that there are times when the anguish of the lesson is absolutely necessary, that leaving the anguish may not be the answer. Now, with absolute assurance, I can tell people, old and young, their lessons can be learned under the most difficult and trying circumstances. Better that we leave our nets after we've learned their lessons. Better that we call on the child because that child knows what to do. The child and the presence are the same one presence, and it is right here where we are, transcending this world's time and space. The final tone in this overtone. The day I moved King Company onto line in Korea, I was given the order of battle of the enemy opposing me just across the valley on the next mountain. Facing my regiment, and me in particular, was the Chinese 60th Army, the same troops I had lived with and trained for 2 years in China. We met again 8 years later in a terrible and senseless slaughter. In the apparent world, our friends and our enemies are the same, and sometimes, needlessly, insanely, we try to destroy one another, thence to find that life is eternal. Like Arjuna in the awful combat, I was instructed in certain of the mysteries and learned the sense of senselessness. Memorial Day, 1985. Making some sense of this world of appearances has much to do with understanding the nature of light, space, energy, and time, especially time. Time and the new cosmology. A new clock is soon to be turned on in the world of time and space, said old Han, talking to the group at the pond. There is something that must be understood about time. The metaphysicians' insistence that matter isn't what it seems to be and that time isn't real is only half right. I think that time is to be understood very soon. A journal musing. Godhead existed before time and space. The ineffable exists, infinite and eternal. Then what are time and space about? They exist for an essential purpose, that mortals might eventually come to understand and know the scope of the ineffable source of themselves. When space has been traversed and the mysteries of time calculated, man will find he has touched only the edges of ineffability. He will find himself like one who has counted all the grains of sand that cover the earth, measured all the leaves in the forest of his dreams, and then awakens to find he knows nothing of the dreamer as whom he exists. Han, master of KWANGSE province. Talking to the little group assembled at the mountain pond, Han said, "When the ineffable asked, 'What am I?' the tangible world came into being. When the ineffable asked, 'Who am I?' life appeared." "What the hell does that mean?" the soldier asked impatiently. "Very simply, the tangible world is God's knowledge of what God is," the old man answered. Life is God's knowledge of who God is. The child within that sparks the life of each of us is God's own self-awareness in the process of happening. That spark is God's self-image. The arrogant and frightened ego that surrounds the spark is the husk of man-made nothingness, standing like a veil between Godhead and its self-image. The who includes the what, and there is no division between awareness and the images that appear within it here. "And what does that mean?" the soldier asked, shaking his head in frustration. There is a clear relationship between science, religion, and metaphysics, and time's cosmology. There is also a clear relationship between the awareness that reads these words and every man's appearance in the physical world of time and space. In this part of the book, let us set out to understand these relationships. Dashan, the mighty mountain. Listen to the story of Dashan. Out of the flat plains of KWANGSE province rises the mythical mountain Dashan, tall and majestic, reaching up through the clouds, its peak enshrouded in a different light, powerful and penetrating, for which the ordinary light of the slopes below is a limited and finite copy. Dashan is a granite mountain, almost pyramidal, with 4 faces, steep and tortured, ascending to a perfect pinnacle where the climber who reaches the top may stand balanced on 1 foot, not unlike a man balancing precariously atop the Great Pyramid of Egypt. In KWANGSE province, the mythical Dashan is the mountain of seeking and finding. It is said that all of us in the world are on the slopes, whether we know it or not. Han, the old sage of KWANGSE, says the purpose of the human experience is to reach Dashan's peak, thence to find one's original and final home that transcends time. There he perceives his genuine identity and becomes his promised reign of dominion over his own subjective world. Among the sayings of Jesus found in the ancient Gnostic library at Nag Hammadi is this: "Blessed is he who was before he came into being." That is, blessed is the identity that pre-existed this body of things. Blessed is the true identity, the perfect image of Godhead, for which this body and experience in linear time are retroactive confirmation. Atop Dashan, we meet the one who existed before this tangible view of things came into finite being. Our real identity already stands atop that peak, exchanging limited light with infinite light, and infinite light with limited light. The struggle for understanding may seem long and difficult, but it is retrospective in time, actually confirming the fact of wisdom, which is already the nature of the true identity. This knowledge understood permits our daily living here in the world, the ascent of Dashan, to happen smoothly and rapidly, as it was ordained as a birthright for every man who searches for the truth. When these discoveries are made, Han says, the climber discovers the penultimate marvel, that the real of himself has been atop Dashan all the while, unbound and untouched by time and space. Yes, Han says, one finds he has always stood above Dashan's tangibility, the whole world under his foot. Then the old master of KWANGSE said, the balanced view at the peak of intellectualism discloses the final limits of human wisdom. Thence a troubling wonder of wonders, that the objective and subjective human experience in the world has always been retrospective self-examination, appearing to the climber as a forward movement in the world of time. Ah, so, don't struggle with this one now, reader. We will proceed to examine this deepest of mysteries because it has to do with matter, time, and space, a mystery you and I and human science will solve momentarily. Is Dashan real, unreal, neither, or both? We are building an analogy. Its purpose is to enable us to understand the simplicity of religion and metaphysics and their place in pure science. The mythical mountain Dashan faces all directions. The mountain is not separate from the earth. So, when we speak of Dashan, we are talking about matter, the world's tangibility. In this sense, the top of Dashan is the top of the physical world and represents the place in time and space where the intangible becomes tangible and where the tangible reverts to intangibility. Is there such a place in reality? Of course there is. There is a point at which something flows from nothing. There is a time and time when time began and matter exploded into form, even as there is a time and time when the purpose of time will be understood and perhaps no longer exist. In one view, that approaching time appears confirmed and seems inevitable as each individual's physical demise. The leading edge of the intellectual world isn't far from that comprehension now, before death. There are those in the world who already understand the nature of and temporal need for time, space, and tangibility. Human life. Myriad forms of life appear to live on the mythical mountain. People are walking on the face of Shan, going uphill or downhill to one degree or another, or in circles, getting nowhere at all. Those of us who do nothing to discern truth, most of us are doing nothing, sink more deeply into the density and darkness of Shan. On the human scale of things, we enter the tangible scene of time and space somewhere on the mountain and leave it, physically, somewhere else, hopefully nearer the top. There are those, like the Buddhists, who say we leave the mountain when we've reached its uppermost limit and have done what we are here to do. Then, in total nothingness of husk self, it is said we become the understanding self of something to do God's bidding. That work is the real work, which has barely begun in time. Shan, the world, mythical or not, is finite. Our search for the truth begins in time and ends in time. Like sand pouring through an hourglass, the sands of time begin and end. Time isn't what it seems to be, and there isn't much of that mythical stuff remaining in which to find ourselves balanced atop the mountain of understanding. Time's hold on us, or our hold on it, is not eternal. The tangible tree of life, as it appears in the world, is not eternal either. The hole in the wall. Han told this story. Once in KWANGSE province there stood a great wall so high it blocked the sun, and nothing grew in that place. During the third dynasty, a certain stranger came down from Shan. He stood beside the wall, made himself into nothing, and vanished. He vanished so completely, the story goes, that a part of the wall vanished with him. Where he had stood, an opening in the wall appeared, like a door through which people could come and go from one side of the wall to the other. The morning light streamed through the doorway, and where the light touched the ground, the first flowers grew in KWANGSE. People were attracted to the new garden of flowers and light. They became the people of the original community. Han looked at his friends and said, "The stranger who made himself nothing was praised for creating the community and became the object of much worship. But it was not the stranger who grew the garden that attracted the people. It was the light. It was the light," Han said again. "Light builds the community, not we ourselves. At the peak of Shan, we become nothing, no place, no thing. Then we become the empty doorway, the way between light and darkness. Who is Han? Han is the child within myself. Han is the child I am." Special note to the reader. The truth is not difficult to understand. It will be immediately rewarding if the reader will let the popular belief that metaphysics or subjectivism is a difficult subject to understand. It is not. We shall prove that in the pages ahead. The idea that the deepest truth is obtuse and difficult is a myth unintentionally projected by fine people who, for the most part, have had undiscerning teachers or inadequate, incomplete textbooks written before the truth had been fully revealed to and confirmed by their authors. For centuries, we've heard the truth misstated or adulterated by well-intentioned teachers who didn't have the least idea what they were really talking about, and whose unsupported, unproven commentary couldn't be comprehended, much less put to the test. For years, we've studied or tried to study inconsistent philosophies that do not hold up under reasoned, rational analysis. I doubt that the Almighty can make sense of much that is written and shouted in the name of truth. But metaphysics, as it actually is not a difficult concept to understand. Our capacity to understand subjectivism is growing in each of us daily. It is a clock turning on within us whose time has come. Just as school children hear about the supposed horrors of geometry or Shakespeare, thence to avoid those subjects if they possibly can, exactly so mankind through the ages has avoided in-depth studies of science, religion, philosophy, metaphysics, or truth, afraid he couldn't understand them and unwilling to make the effort he believed necessary to comprehend. It has been such fear of theology that has kept so many from a study of it. It is the misinformation concerning metaphysics that keeps scientists and religionists from examining the worth of subjectivism. And certainly, the distorted junk one finds in metaphysical works keeps students who are searching from arriving at the green fields of simplicity just above theology and metaphysics, where the goals of all our studies are met. Throughout my life, I have delighted in pointing to the underlying essences of religion and philosophy so they could be understood. I have made the intricacies of metaphysics perfectly plain to those who have come to study with me. Not one has failed to comprehend whatever was necessary to resolve his questions and wonderment of the moment. It will be the same for the reader of this book. Truth is not trying to evade our search. It discloses itself to a willing heart. We ask and are given the answers. We seek and find. We are all natural philosophers, effortlessly living a divine philosophy which is intermingled with our own ideas, and we are doing this every minute of the day. We are all natural subjectivists as certainly as objectivists, and we are being both them simultaneously to one degree or another. For instance, I look across Woodsong's meadow and see a tree. That tree, an object in my view. Simply observing it, and being one who believes in God, I am an objective religionist. But listen. Aware that the tree is beautiful and alive and of a certain dignity and grace, or anything else concerning the essences of that tree, I am simultaneously thinking and observing subjectively. Hence, I am also a natural philosopher and metaphysician living my subjectivism. So is the reader thinking about these words. The forthright fact is that none of us with the least spiritual inclination can look at or think about anything without being a philosopher, a metaphysician, whether we have ever read a single spiritual book or not. As quickly as you and I define our terms herein, we will be walking in the same meadow of mind. It will be helpful for the reader to substitute his own words for those of mine, which may seem unfamiliar at first. The study of metaphysics as a science may seem a complex subject to grasp intellectually. That, depending on whose version of truth it is, but to understand and live as a natural philosopher, metaphysician, and more is not only easy but unavoidable. Furthermore, it is essential. The world, as it is soon to erupt in our faces. A new mode of mentation is on the way. Reader, do not wonder whether or not you are spiritual enough or intellectual enough or have enough faith to understand the truth. You will understand it. You were meant to understand the truth from the beginning of time, whether you consider yourself religious or not, intelligent or not. Does a flower have enough intelligence to bloom? Actually, you understand already. There is something deep within all of us that knows already. Yes, there is something wonderful in the midst of us that understands the discipline of the world and the important issues of life it includes. That knowing is ready to spring up and break out into our daily affairs and make life rich and meaningful again. This volume is intended to prove that. Woodsong on the Hill, 1986. The three simultaneous positions. There is a little understood Zen saying that goes, first it is a mountain, then it is not a mountain, and then, finally, it is a mountain again. Our perception of the truth moves forward continually at those three basic levels. Actually, they are happening simultaneously within each of us, with emphasis on one or the other at each moment in time, depending on our experiences and mode of mind. The three positions are rarely in balance, but our ongoingness in time slowly develops the balance. Events in the years ahead will bring many of us to the balance, thence to see the final position clearly, that it is a mountain again. When we see the mountain again, this time we will know what we are looking at, and we will also understand why we lost sight of reality the first time. The first, it is a mountain, is the objective level of things. We begin as children observing an objective world, learning about people, places, and things. Our training and schooling come to us from the objective position. I am here, identified as this body. The mountain is over there. The mountain is real. The world is real. The body is real. Space and time are real. Sin, sickness, and death are not only real, but inevitable. One is prone to stop at this position and stay there. One can see that St. Doxy and Calvinopolis are two very large cities on the Shan. Somewhere, for the evolving and fortunate, and usually out of some trauma along the way, one learns of idealism, of metaphysics and its subjectivism. As it seems, however, many more hear about the subjective idea than get it straight. At this level of discernment, the metaphysical, we experience and hear about proof after proof that matter is not what it appears to be, but is mental, that things are within awareness, that matter and its space and time are not real, that we are not actually identified as the body, but as the awareness that observes the body, and so on. At this point in our ongoingness, and as the Zen master put it very well, the mountain is not a mountain. One is especially prone to stop at this position and stay there, and to this day nearly everyone in Metadelphia has done just that. A relatively small town on Shan, Metadelphia has high walls around it. Let me emphasize that both the objective and subjective perspectives are happening in all of us simultaneously, here a little, there a little. The purest objectivist who has never read the first metaphysical statement has, nonetheless, at some place in his experience, maybe when terribly ill, drunk, full of drugs, or in the midst of a fearful passionate episode and combat, become momentarily aware, if only subliminally, that there is more to the world than appears to the ordinary senses. The religionist who is still worshiping objectively has had many moments when the subjective feelings of spirit come through, and he knew without question that the mountain is more or less than a mountain. The metaphysician who hasn't actually understood his subjectivism and put it to work might be declaring with all his intellectual might that God is all and there is no matter, but the religionist who has no conscious knowledge of metaphysics and has felt the spirit while reading his Bible or looking at the flower may very well be more conscious of truth than that metaphysician. The step from objectivism to subjectivism is claimed long before it is taken. Finally, there is the third level of awakening of which we are capable, every one of us, metaphysician and religionist alike: rediscovery of identity, the child within. This is the sublime level of perception, and it doesn't take a metaphysical education or any other kind to get there. The child within has been with us since our time began in tangible space. The inner child has a perfectly balanced view from atop to Shan and knows how to act subjectively in an objective world. No, the child within us doesn't throw away its metaphysics as the metaphysician has mistakenly thrown away old theology. The child teaches correctly about the ephemeral nature of matter and the allness of God. The child doesn't insist that we leave our wonderful subjectivity or objective world either, but shows us how to live a perfect balance all the way to the end of the temporal span. Nor does the child throw out every old concept of religion, especially mankind's love for humanity. Rather, the child of us comes to discover religion again, this time with a knowledge of what it is and what it was originally, and why it appears on the scene as a confusing mélange of doctrines. The child teaches us how to live subjectively in an objective world, and in so doing shows us that it is a mountain again, a tangible world that doesn't fool us and that we understand. The child within leads to the balance, and the balance allows us to begin the dominion and reign, the heritage of those who understand. The child takes us quickly to the top of the mountain, right here in the world. The child of us is the real of us. Reader, there is a way to find that child, and this book is about that. The top-down view as opposed to the ordinary view. The top-down view, the the subjective view, is a way to think, a mode of mind. The top-down view begins its thoughts about anything and everything with ineffability, God. Then, from that position, one reasons his way toward the scene at hand. The top-down mode of mentation begins with God as all in all, pure and perfect. The awareness of the reader presently reading these words is God's self-awareness in the process of comprehension. This mode of thinking is the very foundation of subjectivism, though few metaphysicians seem aware of that. The top-down mode of mentation finally becomes essential for our every thought and calculation. The top-down view knows the real of us is the life of us and is the very awareness that perceives these words. This awareness was never born. It doesn't wither and die. It was never born into matter and can't go out of matter. Rather, matter exists as the knowing, the wisdom of God. The real of us knows in some marvelous way that only God is going on. The real of us knows that the reality of this human experience is God's activity. Walking with Michelle. Awakening is a little like seeing the first star in the evening sky. Suddenly there it is, alone and faint, but clearly there. We stop for a moment and say, "This is the first star I see tonight," and maybe smile inside. Underneath our breath, we say the little verse about starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. The light of life, the joy, first comes as something just that faint and small, hardly noticeable, yet something that has happened every night of our lives and gone unnoticed. Until one morning, or afternoon or evening, we see it, really see it, and stop for the first time to savor the event and appreciate it and give thanks for the wonder of it. Something wonderful happens within the heart of us. It is small, just a moment, but for the first time we recognize it to be within the awareness we are. And we know it is part of something grand and wonderful and true, something holy, something extraordinary. We finally know it isn't happenstance, nor luck, nor accident. We recognize it, whatever it is, as something mysterious, a holy moment. Like the first star, we finally notice and savor and give great thanks for it. Especially give thanks. I am the beauty I see, I am the joy I see. I am the excitement and the enthusiasm of everything I see, because I can't recognize something unless I am it. It is me, it is I, it is the holy awareness of God I am. What are the advantages of subjectivism? When the subjective idea dawns, one's view becomes quantum. One's religion becomes quantum. One's experience becomes quantum. One's knowledge begins to multiply until it becomes quantum. What is meant by this? When the subjective idea dawns, one begins to realize that the entire world is unfolding within himself. It begins to dawn The appearance of mankind out there is one's objective view in total, one's own possibilities carried to near infinity. In the pre-subjective state, one was merely one among millions. In the subjective mode, millions are within oneself. In the objective state, there is just me and my pathetic little view of things. In the subjective state, there is this divine awareness, which God is being, and it includes all views within itself, infinite possibilities. In the pre-subjective state, time is linear and sequential. In the subjective state, time is less linear and not necessarily sequential. In the subjective state, time may move in both directions or not exist at all. Einstein's equation came from a subjective state of mind. See what that little subjective idea has done within the objective world? In magnitude, subjectivism can do for the individual what quantum mechanics has done for science, and more. But without the child within, even subjectivism is dead in the water. Subjectivism in religion. To the objective view, there is God and a sinful mankind struggling to return to God's grace. To the subjective view, there is God and God's self-awareness appearing as all possible individual states. The return is leaving the bonds of objectivism to re-embrace the original child, the subjective mind of God. To let that awareness be us, which is also the Christ truth. Then, if we are willing to continue, we find and live the balance. Here, the objective world is understood, not denied. The balance is a step beyond subjectivism, just as the subjective idea is a step beyond the objective view of things. But listen, listen. The child within can be found anywhere along the line at any moment. When the child is found, we go quickly to the balance of things. Subjectivism and the Bible. The blind caterpillar has one opinion about a particular leaf on which it walks. But how much more expansive that view becomes when the caterpillar is a sighted butterfly. Exactly so, the subjectivist has an expanded view of the Bible, considerably beyond the confining, restricting, legalistic interpretation given it by fundamentalist objective churchdom. The winging butterfly's statements and actions relative to the Bible leaf may seem an abomination to the caterpillars still digesting the letter of the leaf, just as quantum mechanics seems to make a mockery of objective physics, but doesn't really. Exactly so. Dawning subjectivism seems an insane mockery of religion to some religionists, especially those who think they are seeing and interpreting the Bible with the only possible view. But just as the subjective states of mind seem superior to the limited views of objectivism, so does the view of the rediscovered and resurrected child within, this the third position, the "it is a mountain again" position, come as an infinitely superior view to those held by the churchman, science, or metaphysician. My metaphysical friends have always been nonplussed by the thought that there could be a position beyond the God is all position. Indeed, there is. God is beyond all concepts and all positions. Later, we will cover this ground in detail. Meanwhile, we remember that there is the third position, quite beyond metaphysics as it presently appears in the world. Finally, it is a mountain again. Here we know what to do concerning the mountains of life, and find ourselves capable of moving them. Letter to an old friend. A summary. Dear Mary, who writes of her search for truth, yes, you have been there all the while, standing on the very peak of the mountain of recognition. Since before Abraham was, identity has been right here. Now you know for yourself that the climb to the mountaintop of understanding, intelligence, wisdom, and identity is actually confirmation. Human events are happening in reverse, so to speak, confirming the fact of perfect all-readiness. Those events happen precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. Yes, exactly as your letter states, our fastest way to the top of the mountain of nearly endless seeking is to understand that identity is there in truth already. The only way there is to be there. And then our human experience confirms that fact. Our confirmation is inverse and comes sequentially, step by step. We see things marvelous in a twinkle, but it may take a lifetime to confirm them. On the human scene, where time holds sway, this confirmation comes like the ascent of a mountain, the flow of the river to the sea, the growth of a tree from seed to seed, and a return to our original freedom. The authority of God is confirmed for us, line upon line, just as you write. Originally, this is what confirmation meant in the eyes of the enlightened. Mary, I delight in your letter, remembering all the times you growled at the absurdity of the world, its injustices and enigmas. Now, it is good to know you understand some of them for yourself and have returned to the non-self atop the Shan. You didn't need to remind me of your incredulous disbelief of your early days, nor of your endless arguments. How could I forget them? But, as you have seen, your self-discovery was inevitable. At least I see it for myself, you write. Self-discovery in time is inevitable because it has already happened in timelessness. Exactly. You state the sequence precisely. The wonder is that we could have overlooked the obvious for so long. But it didn't seem obvious at first, did it? Now we find ourselves wondering exactly as Jesus did, why the spiritual leaders and metaphysicians of the world are the last to see this mystery rather than the first. Mary, now that the things I told you have proven themselves to be true, please listen carefully once more. Your work has just begun. There is much for you to do in this world of appearances. For every person I have helped around the bends of the river or along the slopes of Dashan, you will help 1,000. Inasmuch as those other people are within this consciousness of sequentiality, time, we have arrived at the ability and obligation to address them all and tell them of their birthright. We do it now that we know it. We help others find it and do it now that we can. We don't stop until everyone within us has had the opportunity to walk through the door we find ourselves to be. You will be given yours, who will hear your voice, and you will be faithful to them, giving them your glimpses and substance, and they to you, even as you have been faithful to me and I to you. This is what we are here for, Mary, Lady of the New Covenant within. I love you. Mary has found a measure of herself called identity. It didn't happen as she expected. It didn't happen because she did the things outlined in the textbooks and teachings of the churches and philosophic schools. Nor did Mary do it alone, as some seekers are wont to believe is necessary.